Welcome to the Defence Property Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
Well, g'day everyone, it's Liam Garman here, editor of Defence Connect, back today with another episode of the Defence Property Podcast with my co-host, Kane, Dury, lead buyers agent, director of Discover Buyers Agency, back in the podcast
Liam,
studio.
what's been going on?
Mate, same old.
Yeah.
Same old in a good way. You know, sometimes the less you got on your plate, the less big changes in life, the better.
Yeah.
But you flew down from the GC this morning?
Yeah, flew down this morning. Got the big event tonight. So by the time people are listening to this, they've probably seen a few stories or photos from the event. But the what is it? The Defence
and National Security Workforce
that's
Awards.
Yep. So looking forward to it. Should be a good night.
No, it'll be good fun celebrating everyone in industry and a lot of the initiatives that people have. Wellness, veteran support programs, reserve programs, incredibly important things. And today, I mean, we're not too far off the mark, because today we're going to be helping people in defence navigate property investment.
Yes.
How ADF members can navigate that and some of the unique challenges and opportunities. And I think, Kane, it's fair to say that your first investment property, the hardest.
Yes, definitely. You know, and being in defence, we live our lives 2 to 3 years at a time, you know, whereas if we never went down the path of signing on the dotted line and joining, we live in one town, we might go to uni in that town, we get a job post-uni, save for a deposit, buy a house, have a family and pay it off over 30 years. Pretty boring.
Yeah, for sure.
But, you know, living our life 2 to 3 years at a time, we say we're at your service and we get posted around Australia-wide from Perth to towns or whatever in between. And it's a fairly unique lifestyle. And there can be some challenges with that, but also some opportunities, I guess, when it comes to, you know, building and scaling a property portfolio. So I thought, let's bounce it around and dive into it.
So it's fair to say, really, that in the world of defence, you do have some unique opportunities at your fingertips to get on the property ladder and get investing. And let's be honest, if you look at your peers, if you look at people who are 25 to maybe 35 in some cases, if you're in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and you're kind of going through that 30-year, you get your PPOR, you pay it off, well, your principal place, your house, right?
Yep,
your home. And you pay that off over 30 years. You know, a lot of people who are 25, 35 actually probably in those major cities don't even, that's actually a dream that's kind of escaping a lot of people as well. In defence, you have a lot of tools at your fingertips that can help you on this process. You've got your rental assistance with your posting. You've got DOHAS, you've got HPAS, you've got all these tools that will help you get your first home, whether it's a home owner-occupier or whether it's helping you get your first investment property. So where do you get started, Kane? Let's say you're 24, you're a couple of years in, you've got some savings. Kane, where do you start?
Well, I guess start with the end goal maybe. So that's always a good place. Like, you know, reverse engineer, what do you want out of a property portfolio? Some people might just say, I love stock shares and I just want to buy my home, and cool. Others want to build 3, 4, 5 properties or net worth figure. So probably start with identifying what that looks like. And although all our grants and benefits, both civilian and defence, HPAS, DOHAS, you know, first home guarantee scheme, they're all geared towards buying our first home, not our first investment. Now, the government aren't really out there in the business of giving everyone help to build investment portfolios. We've got to do that ourselves. But that's probably one of the first opportunities of the living our life 2 to 3 years at a time in defence, according to our current posting order, that we can use these grants and benefits and stuff, get into the property market, and we live in it. So we've got a certain criteria we've got to meet and live in it for 12 months. But then once we've ticked that box, we can turn that property into an investment. And if we get posted away, put a tenant in there, and then all of a sudden we might have tenant paying rent, government paying DOHAS, and then some tax benefits to go with it. So we get 3 forms of income from the one property, and we're on the ladder and we're away. So generally, we don't want to get caught up in the thought process on buying my forever home, and almost to a point where we don't really want to buy our forever home while we're in defence, because
You don't know where your forever home's going to be, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some people do, but they're probably the exception, not the rule. Some people know where they want to go, or they might have a very unique trade or position within defence where their posting opportunities are fairly minimal, and they could have that stability, I guess. But then, I was Ramey myself. We were posted 2 to 3 years, and we could go anywhere in Australia because pretty much Ramey was at every barracks
Yeah,
unit.
for sure. Yeah, you've got very little ability
yeah.
to look like a decade into the future, right?
100%. And this is where having that goal that we want to achieve, but also understanding our current position and circumstance, and then how do we actually maximise. So there's the goal, the property markets we're posting to that we've got to assess, all our entitlements that we've got to assess, and also our personal situation, like connecting the dots between where are we and where do we want to go.
I think that you can't understate the goal setting when you're starting off your property journey. You can't understate your goal setting, and it can be super ambitious. It can be the really big property portfolio where you get a passive income and you go overseas and you live your life in Bali, sipping nice drinks every day, and you can do that, and that is an admirable goal if you want it. Yeah. Your goal could be, say, hey, I'm going to start putting my money in the properties, creating a portfolio with an eye maybe one day to have a really nice place in Sydney or Melbourne, or hey, I grew up in an area of Brisbane now that, when I was there 10 years ago, it's tripled in value since. The only way I can get my PPOR or like a really nice owner-occupier in that area of Brisbane I grew up in is if I now take baby steps on that property ladder. There's no wrong answer.
No.
There's no wrong answer. It is up to our listener. Our listeners, this is where you start off. You're like, well, this is where I see myself. This is what I want to achieve. And then, like you said, Kane, you work backwards and you start getting those runs on the board because this might be a 5-10 year thing.
No, keep going.
For our listeners, a lot of people, given their posting orders, might be looking at investing maybe where they grew up, thinking that they're going to move back. Some people might be taking full advantage of those grants that they have at their fingertips. In your world, is there a right answer whether you should be investing first or buying your owner occupier first if you're in defence, or is it a little bit situational?
100% situational, and people might be listening to this, and there'll be a very large portion of our audience that are 18 to 28, say, or 18 to 30, and they're sitting there listening, saying, "I've got no idea what my goal is. How do I say, I feel like that first purchase is forever away." But it's always going to feel forever away if you don't have a plan. So and you might say, I want 5 properties, or I want X figure of net worth, whatever that goal is. But it's not set in stone either. So just because you're 18, I don't know what I want to do. We'll set a goal. Okay, a couple of properties by the time I'm 30. And then reverse engineer to that and break it down a little bit, and then say, well, what do I need to do to actually get started? Because if we sit here and say, well, affordability is through the roof and I'm just never going to buy, it's, you just go down to the pub.
Well, you never will buy.
That's
Exactly.
right,
Yeah.
But if you break it down into little steps, 3 month, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year goals, and then 30 year, and break it down, forecast it all out, it's actually will become a lot more achievable when you say, okay, what do I need to do today or this week or this fortnight? And it could just be as simple as put $100, $200 away, whatever. I want to go out bush or outfield or overseas, put all that money aside. I was actually talking to a young soldier who's just bought his first property recently, and he was in Townsville and he was getting rent assistance. All his rent assistance he put into a separate account and just paid normal rate like he wasn't receiving the rent assistance. And that went on top of his normal savings to accelerate it. So it takes the discipline to do that, but it just supercharged or, got him to his savings target so much sooner.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you're right that there's going to be a lot of people that are out there that unless, don't look at the headlines, right? The headlines will be, the median house price, median, not even mean. So this is like the smack bang in the middle house price in Sydney is now hit 2 mil.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy if you're a young soldier or a young Australian more broadly, and you hear that figure and you're like, well, man, I'm so out of it. Like, there really is no point in trying. So then you do go buy the jet skis, you go to the pub, but don't listen to the headlines. And this is why, Kane, people partner with you, people partner with buyer's agents, because you do find those little eggs right across the country where, someone on a soldier's salary, on a young person's salary, actually, with 1 or 2 years of savings, actually they can get on the property ladder because you've said, hey, why don't you think of this suburb or that suburb? And you might have a contact there where you buy off market. So for people listening that might not be aware of it, what BAs do is they'll create like connections and networks right across the country with real estate agents that know people are selling, that don't necessarily go on Domain or realestate.com. And Kane, you might be able to get them a bargain. So don't despair.
No, yes. And, we just purchased a property for someone down in, Mornington Peninsula area of, I think, Cerberus, 30K under market value or 30K. Thereabouts, And this wasn't market value, me telling them or the sales agent. This was like the bank val. So when they went for the loan, the bank val was higher than the purchase price by 30K. So, great avenues beyond the duopoly of realestate.com and Domain is through relationships and agents, opening up those off-market opportunities when we're sort of posting around. So, and being that we're a national agency and we help defence either invest or relocate, and just general investors build portfolios. We have many relationships Australia-wide for that.
And that's, a lot of people get scared of working with experts because you have to pay to work with an expert. Like, none of this is free, and I don't think anyone would expect it's free, but you get what you pay for. For our listeners, a lot of people are getting sucked into the house and land packages. If you want to learn more about house and land packages, go back to our last podcast. We'll put a link in the show notes where we were pulling apart house and land packages. But, in these areas where you have so much supply of houses coming online, there's actually a real risk that because some of the salespeople for house and land packages are getting like 40, 50K commissions.
100%. Yeah.
So there's actually a real risk that if you buy a house and land package and you go and get it revalued, that actually might come out less than what you paid. And for that's why you partner with the experts. Immediately, this house went up 30K. You've made your BA fee back
the day that you settle.
Yeah, and then you can say confidently, hand on heart, hey, I partnered with someone who's an expert in real estate. I know, hand on heart, I can say confidently that I'm in a growth area versus it might only be 1 or 2 suburbs away. But there's going to be like 2,000 houses coming online and I'm actually not going to make my money back.
And supply is the enemy of growth, right? So that's that building approval ratio we want to pay attention to, because that's what's going to tell us how much new supply is in an area. But that sort of opens up one of the other opportunities to the defence lifestyle. Many people live in their bubble, get their career and buy that house and pay it off over 30 years, and that might be in the suburb that they grew up in. And they get stuck in that little bubble. But being in the defence, it opens up the national landscape of all of Australia, that you don't know where you're going on your next posting. So it forces you to make consideration towards other markets. I want to buy my first home and I've got all these grants and entitlements that I can use, but all of a sudden my savings target's not going to be there within the next 12 months, and I know I'm getting posted soon. So what's that new market like? Because all of a sudden that could propel us forward or backwards. Example, we're posted to, we grew up in Adelaide and we joined the defence. We could get posted to Sydney or we could get posted to Townsville. Now the median house price between the two,
big difference. Yeah, for sure.
So when we reverse engineering we've got our big plan, but we need to reverse engineer our 6-month, 12-month plan to get started as well. So if we're getting posted to, Garden Island, Sydney City, or Townsville, 5 or 10% deposit for a property is very different based on the median house price of those two areas. So we're going to have two different plans or approaches to getting started for those two different people.
So you'd be when we're turning back the clock and we're saying it's situational as to whether to buy an investment or to buy an owner-occupier. So that might be a good example where if you're posted, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe my strategy is not right, but if you're posted to Adelaide, you might say, oh, okay, cool, I'm here for 2 to 4 years. I'm going to get an owner-occupier here, get the grants, DOHAS, which we're all aware of, 3 tiers of DOHAS. You get support direct to bank, isn't it? So,
direct to bank or broker channel for Australian Military Bank.
Yep. And that's up to about $1,000 a month if you're on the higher, if you bought a more expensive place.
Yeah, and you've done 8 years, but
Yep.
I guess we could go back and actually step this out. Like if it was me and I was a new soldier in say Adelaide, like you said, let's say what would be the first thing that we need to do? You know, we're new to the area. We know we want to buy, but where do you start? Like there's one thing to say, I've got all these entitlements, but they're not going to do it for you. They're there to help. So I guess the first step I would take would jump on relocates.com. I'd go to the sold tab, not the for sale, because we want to look and then get a feel for what's actually selling in your area and what the prices are. You can flick between houses, units, and then we're going to know. So we might say, okay, I can get a house for $700,000 and I can see myself living there. And you've got to keep in mind, this isn't our forever home. All right, then we're going to say, okay, make the decision. Are we investing first or are we buying a home to live in? So we're going to say this is a home to live in because we want to get DOHAS and HPAS.
And HPAS is?
17,000 taxed and you get about 11 or thereabouts, rounding up.
What does it stand for?
Home purchase assistance scheme.
So,
it's one of the older schemes. Like I got it in 2005, you know. It was 15 back then and you got maybe 10. So I think they've upped it over the years. Not really kept up with inflation over the last
No, for sure.
25 years.
Yeah, I know. Especially if you're posted to Sydney, it should be close to 70. Yeah.
But yeah, so we're in realestate.com. We found out, you know, 700,000. And then we've got to say, well, what grants and entitlements can I use in this purchase? So we've been in, let's say 6 years and we qualify for mid-tier. We're going to get HPAS, but that's not available till post-settlement. So we'd say we can fly close to the sun with our buffer account or our money. We can drain our account. We don't need any, you know, post-purchase liquidity or cash in the bank because...
How quickly after settlement does it come?
Oh, within a few weeks or a month or so, depending on the pay cycles and settlement date and stuff. But, you know, you're not going to be high and dry for too long. And then we might say, okay, let's set 5% savings target for our deposit. And we'll use the first home guarantee scheme, which is available through many banks. Best place to start would be a conversation with the broker. So then we know 35,000 of that 700 is our 5% deposit. And we might need a few extra K for building, pest, conveyancer, and a few miscellaneous. But that's the bulk of what we need. You know, so there's our savings target. And then hopefully you're on the way to that figure. And if you're not, you know, you just have to, again, step it out, say, how much am I saving per week and fortnight? Set yourself a day. And then all of a sudden we've got our purchase price, our time frame, and then it's just accountability to make it happen. The other side is, okay, we're posted to Sydney and the median house price might be, you know, depending on the suburb, it would vary greatly across Sydney, but we're talking...
Yeah, if you're in Garden Island, you might be... you might
in the
be
millions,
counting your
you know,
pennies,
and then we're looking at units, right? But
you might
even,
be looking at you might be looking at one bedders as
or
well,
car parks,
studios, car parks,
you know. But it's going to be a lot higher. And you might just say, well, let's go down the investing path, you know, and then all of a sudden there's a lot more considerations to how we get started on that. But generally investing, you're going to pay full whack on stamp duty. You're going to pay full whack, or some lenders mortgage insurance if you don't have 20%. And then your deposit are the major fees. But the bonus is because we're in defence and we're, you know, get posted around, we're not investing in our backyard. We can open up all of Australia and really search, you know, so we can use a broker to look for an investment loan at 95%. You know, there still be some mortgage insurance to consider. So you're most likely going to have an 8% deposit, 92% loan, capitalise it to 95. You're going to have the full whack of stamp duty, so then that might influence some of the market consideration for what states have better stamp duty. Also, market cycle timing. So if we're buying our first property using HPAS and DOHAS, we're essentially buying our property in the market we oppose it to. And if that's in a shit spot of its cycle, we're not going to expect any growth, but we're getting in with a lot more help. Versus if we're investing first, we're picking our markets. We're looking at low levels of supply, high demand, good entry to its cycle, affordability is right, and then we know or can expect some good growth over the coming years. So even if you can afford to buy a home and live in it and capitalise on some of those grants, if you can afford to invest first, it might be a better move.
Yeah, for sure. It gives you, like you said, it gives you the benefit of you can be picky.
Yes.
You've got time, you've got flexibility. Take time, do your research. Research, Kane, is in this field easier said than done.
100%, yeah.
Easier said than done, and you would have seen it 1,000 times. You would have had thousands of clients come and go where they're like, they come up with some pretty wacky ideas from what they've seen online.
It's generally come from, Uncle Bob and Aunt Jenny at the family barbecue.
Yeah, for sure. You should buy in this area.
Yeah, great Sparky and nurse, but, not so much property advice.
You do have a lot of family, friends that, at the family barbecue, they're saying, no, invest here, invest there. And to be honest, let's be honest, everyone who's listening to this podcast that probably already has an investment property or bought an owner occupier has gone through it. And you'll always have someone tell you that you made the wrong choice. Don't listen to them. In the world, according to Kane, how do you do research? What are those determining factors that determine whether you should be buying in an area or not?
Oh, there's many, market cycle timing, looking how far it's outperformed the long-term average or underperformed the long-term average. Things like, there's so many to list, like the percentage of owners to renters in a suburb, the economic diversity of a suburb and a region, the supply metrics, stock on market, inventory and building approvals, days on market, vendor discount, and vacancy rate and demand one. So really got to dive into it a lot and just really understand everything we can about it from a data point of view to where it is in its growth cycle. And like you say, Uncle Bob and Aunt Jenny at the family barbecue, they have the best intentions, and they not arguing. They might have 2-3 properties, but have they purchased those properties nationally and timed their entries, or they just brought them in their backyard, or they've moved around with their career a little bit and upsized the family home? There's a big difference with buying, chasing a market versus just buying it and being that accidental investor.
Yeah.
We're listening to Uncle Bob and Jenny at the family barbecue. They might be great to listen to about career if they're similar career and stuff, but unless they have a good understanding of our lifestyle 2 to 3 years at a time, like the impacts on your spouse and their career and how that can impact your property portfolio. For an example, a nurse. So they get posted every 2 to 3 years, and maybe you might do 2 postings in each locality, but you're doing 4 to 6 years in a location before you move to a new one. There tend to be, you go from Townsville to Sydney, then you're new on the wards again as a nurse. So your career can be impacted because you've not got that longevity in one location to progress and promote through. So your income might not be as high as it could have been if you were in one location. So that's a bit of a challenge and that's just one example. There's many husbands and wives who are working spouses of defence members, but their career impacts their potential to earn. They might not be able to start a business, for example. So that's going to be a challenge to overcome. Whereas you might, with that stability, you might have better career progression or build a business and you have higher income. So that's one downside to being a defence member. But another sort of opportunity is understanding, and you're forced into better decisions. You're forced into considering Adelaide and Melbourne and Sydney and pretty much every region, because you don't know where your forever home is. So you can make better decisions based on your lifestyle, I guess.
So I've got a hot one for you. So let's say we take the archetypal example, right? The best example that we can get, which is you bought an owner-occupier in a growth suburb. You got HPAS. You use DOHAS. You've now posted away. You've been posted away for a couple of years. You're now on rental assistance.
Yep.
So real golden opportunity here,
Perfect.
right?
Yep.
And let's say your original posting was in Perth, which is where you bought your owner occupier, and mad in the last 2 years, it's gone up like 300K.
Yeah.
You've taken it. You've bought another 2 places, but you've capped out. You're now hitting your serviceability limit. So this is golden question.
So is this person, I'm saying they've got to that point without a plan?
Well, yeah, let's say they've just
stumbled their way.
They stumbled their way. Yeah, let's say that they stumbled their way, because that's almost like the auntie and uncle at the barbecue, right? They've happened upon 2 or 3. Now the negative gearing's getting high, or your partner, like you said, your partner challenges where they haven't been able to really invest in their career, or maybe they're having a child, or you've now hit that serviceability limit. You've had this goal.
Yeah,
that's a pretty big speed hump to your goal. What do you think, or what's your advice about how they move on from there?
Probably like get professional help. So it sounds like if you've stumbled your way to, 2 or 3 properties, or a home and 2 investments, or 3 investments, depending on your income, everyone's going to get to that sticky point of running out of capacity, from borrowing perspective. So you've got to speak to people. There's no point going to the local Aussie Home Loans or Mortgage Choice or that mortgage belt region where it's all first home buyers and stuff, and the broker that you're speaking to specializes in getting into the market and buying your first home. If what you're wanting to do is build and scale a portfolio of 2, 3, 4, 5 properties and beyond, because the sticky point is 3 to 4 properties, depending on individual, double income, just the overall position. So I guess the first step is to actually have and build a team. Everyone has a team. A sports athlete will have a nutritional coach, a strength coach, and a technical coach, and
a physio, this dietitian,
and building and scaling a portfolio, you're going to need a team as well. You're going to need someone to help you with the buying piece. You're going to need someone to help you access debt and get through those sticky points. You're going to need an accountant that understands that, that's on your side, a conveyancer for each state. So you want to build out your team to help you get to your goal, whatever that is. So like we mentioned earlier in the episode, identifying what's the goal, but also you've got to build the plan to achieve that goal before you get to these sticky points. So, if this person had potentially, let's presume that the example you've given, they've got to the limit of 3 properties, their home and 2 investments, like they have bulk equity in that first one, perfect, timing. They ran out and brought 2 more, and they're at their capacity. If they had engaged,
capacity being that they're
can't, borrowing capacity, like they can't
capacity,
get any more debt. Sorry for the people listening. Whereas if they had sort of built their team out and they had that mortgage broker and buyer's agent that are sort of clued up on building that portfolio, the first investment, so they had their home and then one investment, and the second investment, at least one of those might have been in a different entity in their trust, right? So that's going to allow them to sort of access more debt and preserve some of their borrowing capacity. But being at this point where they've got 2 and they're now at their limit, it's very hard to employ that same strategy. So you sort of want to identify the strategy first before going and capping yourself out.
So, I mean, this is something that we hear so often in the world of property, and I think it's if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to guess you're pretty ambitious, right? Or you're pretty willing to learn and educate yourself. We hear so often about trusts for people that people that are new to property or might be at that cap.
Yeah.
What is a trust? How do they get it? How does it benefit them? And downsides. Yeah,
sure. So I guess the first caveat here is not everyone needs to do it, and you don't just run out and go put it in, because there's downside is additional expenses, additional accounting. You lose So a trust is essentially a different entity, and that's why it allows us to sort of continue borrowing a little bit.
So it's like
more.
a business or?
Well, just a different entity.
Yeah.
So it's not an operating business, but it's an entity that will hold that asset. Whereas, so that isn't going to have personal income because our personal income is in our name. So the tax situation or tax benefit, and specifically negative gearing or depreciation, is not going to apply the same as you would hear from Uncle Bob and Jenny at the family barbecue who brought investment property and now they're getting $5,000 each tax year back because it's in their personal name, offsetting their personal income.
So that's the downside.
So that's the downside.
Yeah.
What the upside is, if it can allow us, or using that strategy to buy an extra 2 properties where we otherwise wouldn't have been able to, and say the average purchase price of those was $750, so it allows us to hold an extra $1.5 million of assets that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And then if we can average 7% growth on that 1.5, it's, off the top of my head, about 95,000 growth per year. I mean, nothing grows in that perfect straight line. It'll be a lot easier if it did. Yeah. But, that's 95,000 of capital growth for an extra 2,000 or 3,000 of accounting fees and, the missed opportunity of not claiming immediate deductions against our income, which we can carry forward and kick that can down the road. But it's probably an episode for an accountant to explain that. So I guess highlighting the opportunity far outweighs the cost, in doing that. But coming back to the first comment, like not everyone needs to go do that. You can still build and over it, depending on your age and your goal. So most people in defence will, achieve their goal with 2-3 investment properties. They don't, not everyone, like you mentioned at the start, needs to go build this portfolio of 10 because that has its own inherent headaches as well.
Yeah, for sure.
That's 10 tenants, 10 lots of insurance, 10 lots of, 10 properties that have to mitigate risks through environmental concerns, locations, loans. There's so much in managing, So if you don't need to take on the risk of managing 10 property portfolio because you can achieve your goal with 4, you just have to decide what's appropriate for you. Yeah.
And with that trust, it's, I think, because it's not in your name, then you have access to that extra debt. Whereas a bank before would have said, no, like Kane or Liam, you've got too much debt to your name. We're not gonna lend you more.
Yeah, and there's a very specific criteria for each property, and this isn't like, say you go to the bank today and and the bank says your max borrowing capacity is $2 million, and you could buy 3 properties with that $2 million. This isn't a strategy that you can then employ this and then all of a sudden that same conversation you can go borrow $4 or $6 million or something. This is something that you have to let play out over time. So it's not a magic wand that you just wave to build a big portfolio. It's careful steps along the way, and the accountant needs to understand the strategy, same as the broker. If you, like we were saying, if you go to your local mortgage broker that specialises in first-home buyers and doesn't really have any clients with large portfolios, they're probably not going to understand it. So just having that clear path and strategy is important. And it's important as well to sort of make note that depending on the time frame, the shorter time frame or the least growth you have on your properties, and if you're going to employ this, there's a holding cost to each property, right? Doesn't matter if you can come up with this fantastic strategy to build a portfolio through purchasing assets in trust and access more debt. If you can't afford to actually hold the assets, it doesn't matter about the strategy of accessing the debt. Does that make sense? So, you have to be able to hold them as well. And that's part of the criteria to actually getting it. So the counter might need to verify the overall position and things like that. So it's not a magic wand. Just because you've purchased a property in a trust doesn't mean it's necessarily the best move for you. But you have to be able to hold that property. And just because it's positive cash flow and it's all good and you can access more debt because you can push it aside or whatnot, if that becomes vacant or you don't have strategies to mitigate the risk of that, appropriate money and buffer accounts, whatever, there's still risk to doing that, So Again, it just comes down to what's the overall strategy and plan for the person, and is it appropriate to go ahead and do that?
Of course. And a very short, quick fire question, because I know this is getting off topic for our podcast, which is navigating property investment as an ADF member. But again, it's something that we hear so often. Investing through SMSF, investing through your super. It's just it is dominating headlines a little bit, Kane, for people that don't necessarily understand that. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think we could probably do a whole episode on that
Easily.
actually.
Yeah, very easily.
And maybe we'll plan that out where we'll get, because there's an accountant that needs to be involved, a financial plan that needs to be involved. Then there's considerations. Are you on MSBS or
MSBS?
So I don't know the year that they stopped, but MSBS was the super scheme that I was on when I was in.
Yep.
So it was from the 90s, and around 2015 or 16, I think they changed over to the current super scheme. So the current schemes, I can't remember the name, it's showing just military super. There's different. So MSBS, you couldn't have a self-managed super fund when you were serving.
Yeah.
But then I got out, and then you can't roll over your employer contributions into a self-managed super fund. But we established our self-managed super fund. My wife was a nurse. We purchased the property, and then her contributions went to the self-managed super fund. I still had MSBS, but then my member contribution, I could roll into the self-managed super fund. And that's how we got our started. So there's a fair bit of consideration to doing it, especially individual versus couple, because me and Nadia, she could contribute to the super fund, and that's what allowed us to borrow in the super fund, where if you're single and military, it might not be suitable.
Yeah, for sure. And I've heard some amazing stories. Now, obviously, this isn't financial advice, and this is just a single example. But I was talking to someone with their SMSF, and because you kind of drip feed it in, right? Like it's a couple of $100 or $1,000 or whatever it is a month, and because you drip feed it in. Now, over time, you're getting returns, and those returns will compound. So yeah, like by the time you retire, you'll have a pretty decent pot there. But I was talking to someone who he had $300K in his super. And then he invested in a property with it. And then given the area that they bought the property in, he spent like 20 years putting into his super. 20 years got him to like $300K, and then he turns it into basically $600K in 2 years or something. He made
with a $300K, maybe bought a property for $1 million, right? Say 20% deposit, 100 to cover stamp duty and some cash left over, because certain banks will require post-purchase liquidity or bit of cash left in the bank. Others maybe not. But yeah, and then he's brought $1 million asset, and it's gone up 20%. Like probably more suburbs have gone up 20% in the last 5 years than suburbs that haven't.
Yeah.
So and then there's $200,000 that he's made. So that's the beauty, and that's the reason people, I feel, would chase property in a self-managed super fund, because it's the one asset that allows you to get leverage. So it allows you to hold that bigger asset with a smaller balance. But it's important to know, there's risks with property, like everything.
Of course, there always is.
So certainly not financial advice here, but yeah, definitely consider if it's right for you, and speak to the appropriate people to help you get it set up. We obviously have a self-managed super fund, and potentially that's the next move when you get to that borrowing capacity limit. You might not need to go venturing into setting up all these complex trusts and corporate trustees and stuff. You might just continue purchasing property in your self-managed super fund. And, that's another avenue for you to go down, because that's another entity. Or you could be at your absolute max capacity, in your personal names, but, you can set up a self-managed super fund and potentially continue to borrow in that.
Absolutely.
It's a different set of rules.
It's a different set of rules, and it's
assessments.
A good chance to. That's long-term plan. That's real long-term plan.
Yeah.
That goes beyond our strategy where we started the podcast. Now, wrapping up, there are some really good opportunities with the posting cycle, because relocating forces you to rethink that portfolio planning.
Yep.
Is this really an area I want to buy? It keeps you constantly on your feet. I think this is it's a bit of a frame of mind, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's that national landscape frame of mind that, we're not living and spending our whole life in one area. We're living our life posting around Australia. So, there's different strategies that can present, from getting DOHAS on our own occupier, turning it into an investment. Then you can, you can buy an own occupier and use HPAS and sell, buy through your posting cycle. And HPAS is designed to simulate the situation where you never joined defence and you lived in one suburb for 30 years and you paid your mortgage off. Because the person that does that, they don't have to relocate, so they don't have all the expenses of selling, buying, and stamp duty and sales agent fees and stuff can be quite expensive. So HPAS is designed to cover those expenses if you choose that I don't like investing, but I still want to live and own in my own home and pay it off. You might buy in the locality you get posted to, sell that, buy in the next one you get posted to, and each locality you buy, sell. And as long as you stay in that cycle, HPAS is a great one with quite a large dollar figure that you can actually repeat transact on, whereas, HPAS is a one-off.
So HPAS, if you haven't bought a house before, if you haven't had to use it, what is it?
So you buy a house and you use HPAS and DOHAS.
Yep.
And you move into it and you've got a mortgage, you're paying the mortgage off, and then all of a sudden, congratulations, Liam, you've just been promoted to sergeant, you're getting posted to Perth. You're like, whoa, wasn't expecting that.
Nice.
Just got our home, we're settled. You're not interested in investing. You just like having your home, paying it off. You then get posted to Perth, you sell your house, and then you buy in Perth. HPAS will cover the majority of your expenses of selling and then buying in the new locality.
Like stamp duty?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. So, and then if you move on from Perth to Darwin, same thing. As long as you stay in a sell and buy with your posting cycle, and there is little criteria to meet and stuff, but yeah, that's what it's designed for. So, you could be that own occupier and then continue buying and selling through your posting cycle and just use HPAS. It's probably the least common because you're only holding one property and it's not an investment, so there's no tax benefits. You're not chasing wealth because it's your home. So it's probably less commonly used. Most people use HPAS and DOHAS at some point, typically when they're getting started, unless they choose they don't need to when they get started and they save save DOHAS for the end, and they they might build a portfolio. I'm a strong advocator. If you don't need to use HPAS and DOHAS and you can go straight into investing, stay in rent assistance and build wealth investing, because then you're building, you're rent investing. So your defence is paying part of your rent, or you live in service accommodation, so it's cheaper. So your cost of living is much cheaper because you're getting assistance. And then you're building one or two investments rather than having a home and having one. You might have two investments and no home. But that means you've got more debt on your investment portfolio, which means a better tax position and probably a bigger exposure for a growth asset.
And well, yeah, you get the bigger exposure to a growth asset because instead of just choosing around the Mornington Peninsula, we'll take that as an example, you've got the entirety of Australia.
You're not backed into a corner, are you?
Yeah.
So you can buy it in all of Australia. You're using some of those research methodologies to pick your markets where, if you're doing that, even the HPAS cycle and buying everywhere you get posted, you could have a very bad run.
Yeah.
Because generally speaking, plateaus and flat markets
That's what we were talking about 2 podcasts
8,
ago.
10, 12 years, and growth periods are 3, 4, 5, 6 max, whatever.
Our 2 podcasts ago, Kane and I, we'll put it in the show notes as well, did a sit down where we looked through all the major bases in Australia. And I think Darwin was flat for like 10 years or something, wasn't it? That's what the data said. And like Perth was flat for like 14
Perth was
or
for
something.
14 towns, so you can really have a bad run. And, you could even post out of a location into a bad one, and that location you've just left is ready for its price movement.
Yeah, for sure.
So strap in for some hindsight. But, I have met people as well that have just had perfect posting cycles for luck. Yeah. And they've sold at peaks and purchased at troughs and made, they've just had a really good run.
Where they went from like Sydney to 2021, then like 2021, 2023, Brisbane, then over to Perth or something.
And they just get this like run of postings for the property. But for every one of those stories that I hear, there's probably like 3 or 4 people that have had bad runs because, like we were saying, probability wise, the length of the non-growth versus the length of the boom or the growth of any area is twice as long. So you're twice as likely, I guess, to get the bad side rather than the good side of it. So and that's where investing, like just invest in good markets and pick your markets and get rent assistance. Like it's just so good.
You also just like it's a different type of debt you're carrying because
that's right as well. Like sorry to interrupt. Like you get $1 million of own occupier debt, you can probably get 1.5 of investment debt,
because you've got someone in there paying it off.
Yeah, that's right. You got that rent, and you've got rent assistance, so you're not paying it off, and you got tax assistance, so you can have a bigger asset exposure. If you compound out on a compound interest calculator, 1.5 million asset base versus $1 million asset base, same growth rate, same everything else. Forget about tax and that, just pure growth, and compound that over 30 years. Well, we should do it now. I'd be interested to see.
Well, maybe we'll.
I'll
edit
do
that
the
back
results
in.
and we'll jump it in on next asset. But
I don't want anyone seeing my mathematical abilities on the podcast. There obviously are complexities, tax planning on the portfolio, capital gains tax, main residence exemption for 6 years.
Yeah, there's so much to consider. Like if you're gonna using that Hep C cycle, that buy, sell, buy. Well, no, that because you're not going to have any capital gains there, and you're always in your own occupier. But if you were to say, I want to build my portfolio, and this is another common approach, use HPAS and DOHAS, and you buy in location A, you get posted to location B, you retain it as an investment. Location B, like, I'm going to buy another home and live in it because many people just like living in the home. And then you go to location C and you buy one there, and you kind of build this portfolio over a long career in defence, and you've got multiple properties and locations that you've been posted to. You get your main residence tax exemption on the growth of that for 6 years, but if you're posted every 3 years, they're overlapping, and you need to, if you do sell in the future, you need an accountant that's switched on to make sure that you don't double dip the main residence exemption, because the ATO aren't going to like that, and you're not entitled to claim it on 2 properties that overlap in a period of time. So you can only claim it on one for that 6 years. So if you live in location A, move out and get posted to location B, and you buy a property there, you won't get it for 6 years on location A. You'll only get it up until the period that you purchased and moved into the one that you own in location B. So considering all that, and then if you do hold them all and then sell at the back end, there's a fair bit to sort of break down there. So it is like builds this, especially when you are mixing own occupiers with investments, does build this layer of complexity, I guess, that we need to be aware of, especially at the back end of the portfolio when we decide, or if we decide to sell any.
Well, for sure. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, surrounding yourself by your A team, but also not advice, but I think it's reasonable to, don't cheap out.
No, that's right.
Just don't cheap out. Like,
I was having this conversation with someone the other day, like, from painting your house to doing your annual tax return to, getting pizza on Friday night. You generally get the pizza store to do it for you. You know what I mean? Like all these professions, and I've painted my own house before, and probably took me twice. Took me twice as long.
Yeah,
it was a fortnight after having a knee operation. I was in defence.
Don't know why you did that.
Oh, mate, and almost fell off the roof. The job was probably shit.
Yeah.
And pay someone to do it would have been done in half the time to a better standard.
For sure.
So no one's arguing. You can go. You don't need a buyer's agent. You can go do it yourself. But the results that you get would be highly varied.
I don't do it myself.
No,
I've always used buyer's agents because I have a property podcast. So I'm lucky that I dabble, but I'm not proud enough to say that I know the pockets.
Yeah,
I've got a pretty good gut feeling of
feel the coal face of the industry a little bit, or maybe not the coal face, but I've
got a good sense.
Yeah,
but man, the work that you do, and I know we touch on this all the time, but you whittle it down from like 10,000 suburbs to 30 or something like that. Yeah. Because you do research and you've got these like 40 different data points that you go through. Now, not everything's about data. That's why you also go on the ground to double check it, right? I truly believe if you work a full-time job, you cannot mirror that level of intelligence and insight.
There's so many aspects of the service where you save that fee as well. Like there's the market selection. So one lady we were working with, she was looking for an owner-occupier by herself. Her budget was 1.2 million, and she was single and felt a lot of the agents and properties she was looking at, she was getting fobbed off a bit. In that 12 months, and she didn't trust the agents, and probably rightly so. Yeah. But she lacked a bit of confidence as well. The market moved 10% in that 12 months. So she, on a budget,
more like 5 times your BA fee or something.
120,000. 10 times. In between 5 and 10. But so she missed out on 120,000 of growth. So that's what we call opportunity cost. We purchased in the first month for her.
And it's also your stamp duty would have gone up as well. So like so many
100%.
little things.
Yeah. I haven't even thought of that,
summed.
but and mortgage insurance if it was applicable. But and the average Australian might purchase 1, 2 or 3 properties in their life. Like I'd love to know the repeat, like because people will upsize the family home and buy again. Then 20 years later, they might downsize the family home and buy again. Of the ones that do, some might have an investment.
You know what? I think I know where you're going.
I would say it'll be less than 5. All transactions.
Way less. And I think I know where you're going because if you think that you're going to go toe-to-toe in a negotiation with a real estate agent that does this.
You do it 5 times in a lifetime versus an agent that probably does it 5 times in a month.
Yeah.
There's tricks. There's tricks. There's shit that they say. Like they're going to suck out a lot more than 15 grand or whatever the average buyer's agent fee is these days. Yeah. You're going to pay it 100%.
Yeah. Like you think you're going to out negotiate this person.
But then there's also industry relations. Like some agents will just flat out tell you the price because you're a buyer's agent. They'll say where it needs to be, like rightly or wrongly, if that's best in interest for the vendor or whatever. But if you're a buyer coming through the open home on Saturday, they're creating competition to make you pay maximum. And there's that, can we purchase it before that open home, before it hits the major portals, through relationships. So then there's due diligence.
You do get like with agents, there can be, and obviously in every industry there are people that
it's not always bad intent, right?
Not always,
it's just competence.
But some do.
Yeah,
some do, and especially if you're.
That's why we're all humans.
If you're, there's going to be good and bad eggs in everything. But if you're, you're 23, you're listening to this podcast, you've got a little bit of dough saved up, and you're like, okay, cool. I'm now. I didn't know about this HPAS thing. That should give me the breathing room to do it, and then fantastic. We had someone who I know who was going through an open home, and if you're young, they will maybe think that you're less savvy in this area.
100%.
And an agent told them, this is a very good friend of mine. An agent told them, it's like, well, I'm not even going to pass on that offer to the vendor. And then my friend said, well, you have to. You have to pass every offer on to the vendor. He's like, oh, well, no, what I meant was, it's like, so there are always going to be people out there that are going to try and strong arm you, which is why you do partner with the experts.
Do you know the amount of deals that I've actually won being 5, 10 or 20K under a higher offer that they've gone with us because we're a buyer's agent over direct to someone because they've got intent. Someone's selling for a reason, right? So they're most commonly upsizing, downsizing or moving in the state, right? And they can't buy until they've sold. So they need their property under contract, smooth, settled on time every time, so and then that's going to allow them having an unconditional contract to go purchase elsewhere. So sometimes price isn't the major motive.
With my owner-occupier. Yeah. We did that with my owner-occupier because we came in and we and with a BA. Yep. With a BA, you know who my BA is.
Presume I don't know.
I think you know them personally. but like it was, we dotted all the I's, we crossed all the T's before we got to the negotiation phase. So it was like conveyancing done, building and pest done, this done, that done. Okay, contract, speaking to the agent. Okay, no, we've already done it all. Oh well, the other people still haven't done building and pest. They're going to need another week. Boom, walk straight in.
Yeah,
and that's how you. When you set yourself up for success.
Price is not everyone's motive, and it's understanding through conversations what the motive is, where they're going, what they're doing. Same as like we've won deals 30K under, and that's purely just based on the conditions of the contract that made us more favourable. Yeah. So if you don't even know what those conditions are to put in a contract to make it stand out, to make it more favourable, hey, good luck. You save 15, 20 grand or whatever on a buyer's agent. Yeah, but you just spent 50,000 more
on the property,
on the purchase.
Yeah, for sure. Now you've got some examples of people that you've worked with, a young investor on rent assistance.
Cool. So, investor on rent assistance. So they use the bank of mum and dad. This is a great one, and I think we might need to do an episode where we get a broker in and we talk about self-managed super funds and the bank of mum and dad.
How to beg your parents.
Yeah. But essentially they had a small deposit, like they've been saving, but they've used equity from mum and dad to cover the gap, and they've got their first investment and they're away. So, generally the market's moving faster than what you're saving. So
for sure,
if you're saving, even doing well, 2.5, 3, 4 grand a month, the market's probably moving that plus more. If we're looking at 500, 750, $1 million asset, long-term averages, 6, 7%, whatever that is, monthly. So the sooner you get in, and that's why not getting caught up emotionally on forever home, this and that, whatever your strategy is, if it's investing first, own occupier first, get into the market, get an asset that's growing for you, and even more importantly, get in a good market. Don't buy somewhere in the outskirts of Ipswich, where the building approval ratio is sitting at 3%, because you're going to have, get into a good market early and let time and the market do the heavy lifting. Don't try and save your way to 20% of your dream home, because you'll be saving forever, and inflation will erode those savings faster than something very fast.
Yeah, fast thing. Yeah, look, mate, I think that's what we have time for today. Now, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, so reach out to us, discoverbuyersagency.com.au. We're on all social channels, free discovery call. Just give us a bell. Happy to talk through HPAS, DOHAS strategy, where you are now, where you want to get to, where you need to be to buy. Happy to have a chat.
Yeah, fantastic.
Awesome.
You'll see Kane all over Instagram now.
Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah. Look, that is all we have time for today, and we'll be back in a few weeks with another episode of the Defence Property Podcast. But until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.